Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's episode where I have the pleasure of chatting with Kelvin Gary, CEO and the big boss man at BodySpace Fitness in New York City. I've had the pleasure of training with Kelvin and his team at BodySpace, and I can definitely say it's one of my favorite, if not the best place to train in New York City. Kelvin, round two, here we go.
Mic check, mic check.
First time around, we had some AV difficulties, but hopefully we can get through this one without any hiccups.
There we go.
Been following you and your team and your family through Instagram. Looks like everybody's been doing okay.
Yeah. Knock on wood. Everyone's doing okay and healthy, and our whole staff and whole team is doing well and really busy. So it's been good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really quick, let's get into your background a bit. Tell us how you got into fitness and personal training.
Many years ago. Now, long story short, my background is I'm a civil engineering major, an environmental engineering major, and I did my MBA at Stern, right? School of Business. And you might say, well, that has absolutely nothing to do with training, and that's correct. I did play a little bit of sports in college, and basically, got to a point in my professional career where I realized that sitting behind a desk all day was basically destroying my body, because I, played, Division I sports before, and never gotten injured. And next thing you know, I'm sitting at a desk and I'm 20 pounds overweight and, tearing hamstrings playing, company league softball and that sort of craziness. So I did my personal training certification just for myself originally. And, eventually some friends of mine found out I was a personal trainer, and they said, hey, you gotta train us. And after a while, they said, hey, you're really good at this. Well, you should train all of us and our friends, and we made you some business cards. You're going to start a business. And I'm like, okay. And long story short, not that long after that, the same friends came to me and said, hey, we think you should quit your job in corporate finance and go become like a trainer full time. And, luckily, as the world would have it, I had the opportunity to jump ship from the corporate world and go do what I love, which was training, which is kind of helping people build a better version of themselves, higher operating version of themselves, higher performing version of themselves. I left the corporate world, went to a pretty well-known big box gym in the city, was there for a few years before I said, hey, there's something I can see that we can do that's different for clients. And I'm going to go kind of make that happen myself, understanding that, the Nike quote that's like, everybody is an athlete. It's like, you can train like an athlete. You can train like an athlete for life. Right. So that kind of like drove my training philosophy, and why we kind of opened up BodySpace Fitness to kind of live that philosophy out.
Nice. So do these friends have a percentage in the company now too?
No, they don't. But it's funny because I'm still friends with them. They've moved away, but I'm still friends with them. So.
That's awesome. Every time I'm inside BodySpace, the energy, the vibe, and the camaraderie between the clients and the trainers and the staff is just so infectious. How have you managed to cultivate such a work hard, play hard environment? And is that what you think separates you from the other gyms that are out there right now?
Yeah, I think so. Point number one is that, that was one of the main reasons that I opened my own studio, is that I saw how, in a big box setting, the environment had an impact on how my clients would react, and essentially how they would see results or not. If you're in the middle of a big box gym with, 600 people and 10 people around you trying to take the dumbbells that you're using and giving you a hard time about it, versus everyone working on a common goal, working together, teamwork in various forms, being a part of what you do. And like you said, camaraderie, that's what gets people comfortable with what they're doing. And if they're comfortable, they can be focused on what they're doing. And that's, kind of why we started. And then, with regards to my team, it's been a process. Last Friday was our 8-year anniversary. and I tell someone, I said, my team now is the best team I've ever had. It's been a process. I have 3 coaches that have been with me since year 1. And 3 of the 10 have been with me since year 1. And, it's one of those higher, slow, fire, fast, but higher based on core values.
Mm-hmm.
And if culture, and making sure the culture of understanding, and making sure that you have coaches that realize that, we're not there. They're not there to look at themselves in the mirror. They're there to be a role model for their clients and to make sure their clients are well taken care of and put their clients first. When you, at the end of the day, hire people that put people first, it goes a long way. And they understand the culture and environment of the gym too, right? Because at the end of the day, someone can open up a gym right down the street from us that has the exact same equipment, the exact same layout, and the exact same number of kettlebells. But what's going to really make the difference is the people and the systems that you run. And even if the systems are exactly the same, it all comes down to the people, right?
For sure. So my main goal with these vlogs is basically to try and enhance quality of play on the court for the average squash player. You've seen me play, you've seen Olivia Fictor play, Bobby Burns. So I figured you'd be the best person to ask what your suggestions would be for a squash player in terms of warm-up, strengthening, and recovery. There's such a big component for pre and post play readiness and preparation. And I just feel like the community in general is not going about it in the right way.
So all and what I'm trying to get through with one of my younger guys there that I'm working with is like all the stuff that you do off the court that will make you more efficient on the court, right? So making sure that your body's primed and ready to go from a energy standpoint, from a movement capacity standpoint. And I say movement capacity in the sense of like, are you doing your mobility drills? Are you foam rolling, doing your Theragun, Hypervolt, R3, 10-10, whichever device you want to use. Are you sleeping right? Are you eating enough? Are you understanding that strength is the foundation and the platform by which you launch your attack, right? So you can have someone, and say for, I'm going to use sprinters for example. If you have someone that has more muscle mass and can activate it better from a neurological standpoint, they're probably going to be a better and faster sprinter, right? We don't have sprinters here, but we have, from watching the sport, people who accelerate and decelerate far more, accelerate and decelerate and change directions far more in any game or match than any other sport I've seen. I mean, even soccer, right? So you think about all the absorption of force that needs to occur for you to stop, accelerate again, and stop again. Stopping is decelerating. It takes more energy to decelerate than it does accelerate, and you have to be able to absorb that energy, and that comes from building some strength and quality in your muscle tissue, which comes from strength training, right? So I think there's a whole continuum of things that that it really is like, you look at it, it's like, okay, well, the time I spend on the court is actually, only a fraction of the time that I need to be spending doing the things that I need to do, even from a there's the mental and mindset part of things. There's the understanding your opponent side of things too, but there's a lot of movement prep, movement capacity, strength, and recovery work that's like will make you better and more efficient on the court.
That's great. And where's your source of inspiration for mobility drills? And do you have a place where people can go and look at some of the stuff that you've mentioned?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, there's a lot of different places. I mean, obviously the Mike Boyle stuff, bodybyboyle.com, strengthcoach.com, and a lot of the resources we get from CFSC. One of the resources that I like, and it's funny because this was like one of the first CrossFit guys back when CrossFit and like the traditional strength and conditioning worlds didn't necessarily agree with each other. There was a guy named Kelly Starrett, who wrote a book that's like a gigantic encyclopedia of stretching and foam rolling and mobility drills called Becoming a Supple Leopard, which if you get the book and you're like, I'm going to try to open this book and read it, you're in for misery, right? You might want to read like the first couple chapters and then bounce around based on what your needs are, right? That is one of the best books I've found for like giving people like myofascial release, assisted stretching, flossing, like a bunch of different techniques of like how to make sure that you have the appropriate amount, the appropriate tissue quality, and kind of ready to go from that perspective. And then we use a tool called the functional movement screen, and that screen essentially allows us to look to see if you have any movement pattern discrepancies that we need to be aware of. Are your hips tight? Are your ankles tight? Your shoulder mobility, not too great. Based on that, we kind of know what we want to maybe loosen or strengthen. It's a good assessment to say, okay, well, instead of like stretching or foam rolling everything, if you don't have time, like what are the big buckets that we want to like take care of first, and then kind of everything else will be icing on top. So the functional movement screen, that's one that we say, hey, if you can find someone around you that does a functional movement screen, great, right? Do that too.
Yeah. Through my CFSE certification, I kind of learned why we foam roll. It's kind of one of those things that everybody believes that it's about breaking up the knots, but it's actually just about loosening up the tissue to get more water through the tissue, right? So is that accurate? Am I explaining it the right way? Is there another
so that
to foam rolling?
And this is, there's a lot of people that come out now, and sometimes I think people say things to kind of like spark controversy so that they can kind of like get attention. But way back, not even way back when, just a few years ago, when there was research that stated that static stretching was bad for you. So now, next thing you know, everyone stopped static stretching. When at the same time, if you looked at the research, it basically was like, okay, well, it's not necessarily that it's bad for you. It does kind of like shut things down from a neural standpoint. So maybe it's maybe it's not as efficient to do it and then go out and do an activity. But yeah, getting the fascia to kind of chill out, getting the blood flow and the water flow, and getting the muscle quality back to its right consistency so that you can static stretch it and dynamic stretch it and then get it to operate, right? So that's why it's like, yeah, we have a continuum of like, we have people come in, they'll foam roll first, they'll do some static stretching, they'll do some dynamic stretching, they'll do some activation drills and movement prep, and then they're ready to work, right? So making sure the tissue has the right quality, making sure that it can contract and relax to its optimum length, as optimum as we can get it within like a short period of warm up, and to make sure that it's operating along with the nervous system well before we make it go out and perform. It's one of those things where when people tell me, oh, foam rolling doesn't work, and I'm like, well, I have years of experience to tell me that might not be the case, or maybe it's been like a 10-year-long placebo effect. I don't know. But if it's like, it's one of those things where people are like, oh, it doesn't work. It's like, well, I'm going to try it. If I feel like it works, and I feel like it helps me operate better, then I'm going to do it. And, like I said, even if it's all in my head at that point,
yeah,
that's kind of like the at that point it kind of like becomes like the Nomar Garcia Parra playing with his batting gloves in between every pitch. It becomes just something that I do as a weighted something that I do as a just like a part of my system of how I operate.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that particular topic about making the tissues and your muscles fire correctly and work accurately, a lot of squash players in general have tight hips. As you mentioned, there's constant torque, rotation, change in direction. And a lot of guys on the doubles tour with me struggle with shoulder soreness and shoulder pain.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest specifically for the hips and the shoulders to maintain and strengthen as a squash player?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and watching you guys play and watching you guys operate, and in sports in general, tight hips is a huge thing. And you think about all the things that happen as a result of tight hips. Glutes are generally weakened because they're hip flexion. They're basically a antagonist to hip flexion. So, if your hips are really tight, generally speaking, your glutes are weak. The starting point of your hamstrings are shifted up, so your hamstrings are kind of you can even almost say artificially tight. Puts a lot of stress on your posterior chain. Next thing you know, your calf's overworking, right? So I think there's a lot that can be done with regards to like rolling the parts of the hip, understanding that there are a lot of different hip flexors, right? Um, you got your main ones, your psoas and your iliacus, which it's hard to roll your psoas, but now with the mention of like psorites and things like that, I mean, if you get to a good physical therapist that can release your psoas, great, right? You think of things like the tensor fascia lata, which is that little muscle right there at the um, top of your hip towards the outside of your hip, which is a major hip flexor, and it's also kind of like one of the key drivers of your IT band. That's a big one to hit. One of your quad muscles, your rectus femoris, that goes right up the middle, the bigger of the quad muscles. Your quads extend your knee, right? Super important for when you go to lunge for a shot and push back out of that shot, right? You're extending your hip and you're extending your knee. So your glutes and your quads have to work. But at the same time, it's the one quad muscle that crossed your knee and your hip. And then your adductors, your groin, right? There are several muscles in your adductors that are also hip flexors. And most times when I ask people, do they foam roll? They say, yes. Like, you ever foam roll your TFL? They say, your tensor fascia latte? And they're like, that sounds like a drink at Starbucks. And I said, what about your adductors? You ever foam roll your adductors? And they just kind of like look at me. And I have them foam roll both of those spots. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's painful. I'm like, but then once I have those areas loosened and rolled out and kind of get the tissue quality back, what I then do is go and kind of hit those areas that are going to be a little bit weaker. So like my glutes, right? I usually, and you saw, we hit the glutes a lot. I kind of make a joke that I want people to be able to bounce quarters off of my clients' behinds, and it's like, but at the same time, you want your glutes to be active after you got your hips to chill out, right? Understanding that your glutes are going to be the powerhouse of extension when you lunge, right? Your glutes are also a part of your core. So when it comes to force transfer, especially with you guys, since you're really not winding up, so I mean, you're putting a lot of force into a shot that your body's kind of having to do something with, making sure your core works properly is like huge. Um, but so a lot of rolling of the TFL, glute med, rectus femoris quad, and adductors. And then doing a lot of work around strengthening the glutes. So that's what I do for like the lower body. Upper body, super pec heavy. And when you guys are hitting the back shot, it's not like you're even getting a full scapular retraction, right? So everything that you guys do is very much forward and closed off in like tight pec, kind of a tight pec, tight lat sort of position, because the lats are also an internal rotator. So I think about what that does as far as like posture, what that does as far as rotator cuff health. Generally speaking, when people have a rotator cuff issue, it's because they've started to lose stability in that glenohumeral joint as a result of it being kind of pulled out of position for too long, right? And you think about a muscle that's pulled out of position for too long is also a overstretched muscle is a weak muscle, right? You also think about the fact that it's like, between the neck pain and the back spasms, a lot of that can be a result of just having poor glenohumeral rhythm, shoulder blade not moving around the rib cage right, and basically those muscles in the middle of your back kind of spasming as a result of being stretched too far for too long over time, right? think about what happens when someone's stretching your hamstring and they stretch it too fast. What happens? Your leg jerks, your leg jerks and the muscle contracts to protect itself. So there's a lot of like protective mechanisms that happen in our body that we kind of just like override it and keep going. So when it comes to the shoulder and shoulder health, yeah, you want to do all the things, wall slides, angels, kind of rotator cuff exercises with the bands, but it's all going to be borderline useless if you don't get the root cause of what's going on, which is usually tight pec or things that are going to tightly internally rotate you. If you can get those guys to chill out before you start to do that sort of stuff, you're gonna see more of an impact from it. Not just doing it, but doing it as a daily habit, and not just before you go on the court. All right, because same way people that don't play squash, I mean, I sleep on my left side. So I take the lacrosse ball or trigger point ball, roll up my pec and do a couple different stretches along with a couple different stretches for my lats. And sometimes I use a band. Sometimes I just grab the door frame and just like open it up, externally rotate my shoulder, and then kind of like stretch my pec out. And then I work on my breathing because breathing helps with stretches, right? So I think those are two things that people, or like things that people can do to work with those two areas in particular, is like see what's tight, loosen that up, and strengthen the opposite side of it, and that'll bring you back into balance a little bit. And you'll see, will it work overnight? No. Will it work over a period of time of being consistent with it? Yes.
You kind of basically went over what Mike Boyle talks about with the joint by joint approach, right? Like you might have knee pain, but it's probably coming from a tight quad. And the same way with the shoulder, you might have shoulder pain, but it's coming from your pec, right?
Oh, exactly. And basically to touch on what you're talking about there is, between him and Greg Cook, they kind of came up there might have been other people involved, but they kind of came up with this philosophy of like, the body's just a stack of joints, right? And I go as far, I think they've added the foot in, but I added the foot in too. You have your feet, right? You think about it. There's 26 bones in each foot. And like 104, 105 bones in your entire body. So it's like, think of like how many of your body's like bones are in just those two things. So you got your foot, which should be very stable. Your ankle, which should be very mobile. Your knee, which should be very stable, which is why you got all those ligaments that just want you to do this. It doesn't want you to do this. It wants you not to do those things, right? So you got your foot, which should be stable. Ankle, which should be mobile. Knee should be stable. Hip should be mobile. Lumbar spine should be stable. Hence, I'll get to that in a second. Thoracic spine, shoulder blade moving around the rib cage should be very mobile. Glenohumeral joint, shoulder moving around in the joint should be very mobile, right? Cervical spine should be pretty stable with some ability to move around. Now, generally speaking, when you have an area that should be mobile and it lacks mobility, you can almost always take an issue that might occur in an area that should be stable, like your knee or your lumbar spine, and attribute it to a lack of mobility in the area above it or below it. More times than not. So like, when former basketball and volleyball players come in and they have massive knee pain and like L405 herniations, it's because, for years they taped up their ankles and made them extra stable and wore high top shoes, and they were in the athletic ready position for most of their college career, right? So, and then with volleyball players, they just constantly spike. So it's like, now you have a tight pec, you have an area of poor shoulder mobility, you got tight hips, poor hip mobility. You think of your lumbar spine, which is an area that should be very stable, will now usually become mobile, hence the herniations there, right? More times than not, yeah. Can someone fall and every other root cause of the herniation? Yes, but generally speaking, if you have tight hips, tight shoulders, you can almost guarantee there's going to be like some sort of herniation down the line there. But, one of the things that you want to do is bring balance back to your hips so that you can not be too, what we call hyperlordotic, or kind of like little bit more of an arched back and kind of bring the stability back to that area, along with strengthening your pelvic floor and your glutes and your core, and kind of bring stability back to that area. So yeah, if you have knee pain, take a look at your hips and ankles and see if you can work on being mobile in those areas and stabilizing your femur by making sure your glutes fire properly to keep your femur in place. And you'd be surprised to see if that knee pain might go away.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's absolutely correct. I mean, you and I both ruptured our Achilles in our athletic careers. And
so funny story. I didn't rupture my Achilles in my athletic career. I was working my desk job at that point, and I was playing dodgeball. I had left work. It had been a crazy week. I knew my calves were tight, and I was a trainer by that point, still kind of training and like working my desk job. Yeah, I was playing dodgeball, and it was about a year and a half later where I met Greg Cook, who was one of the people who came up with the joint by joint approach to training. And I was telling the story about my me tearing my Achilles, and I really didn't get the whole joint by joint approach fully until he did a test on me. He did the FMS on me, and he says, "Well, I just want you to know you didn't tear your Achilles because your calf were tight. You tore your Achilles because your hips are super, super tight." I'm like, "No, I tore my Achilles because my calf was tight." He said, "No, your hips were tight." And we just kind of like stared at each other for 30 seconds. I'm like, "Man, this dude's smart." But after getting how it really, my hips were tight, which means that my glutes were really weak, which also meant that my hamstrings were overtired. No matter how much I stretched my hamstrings, I couldn't get them to chill out. Same thing with my calves. But all this extra stress was put on my posterior chain because my hips were tight, which made my glutes weak, which kind of threw my posterior chain out of whack. And next thing you know, when I needed my posterior chain to work the way that it should have, it didn't. Right. So yeah, I mean, funny story. It's like that's how I tore my Achilles. But
no, totally. I mean, that's funny, but like it's the same thing that I experienced. I was always told that my glutes weren't firing. I noticed that I always had tight hips, and then you'll have the medical field that will be saying things that they don't know the exact cause of the rupture, But just going back to that, I personally, I've always been told that my glutes weren't firing. And what would you as a trainer use as a telltale sign that they're not firing, and how can you work on that?
So there's a couple basic tests, like the one that we do, which is you kind of get on the all fours and sit back, straighten one leg out and try to lift it off the ground. That's one kind of test. And maybe I'll send you that test so you can put up on the blog along with this guy. But one of the big things I look for is if we were to do like a jump down test, or like jump down off a box. If I see you accelerate, or if I see you decelerate and land, and there's a lot of knee valgus, I know that there's a high chance that your glutes aren't firing to stabilize your femur. Same thing when you do a squat, same thing when you lunge. Not only when you go out from the lunge, but when you push back, does your knee valgus, meaning does your knee collapse in? That is a pretty big telltale that you're trying to extend through that limb and your glute doesn't fire to stabilize it. Because you think your glutes, right, they're hip extensors, they extend your hip. They are external rotators as well. But your glutes are, here comes my interrupter in chief. Your glutes also fire to stabilize your femur, right? So similar to the way he has a soccer ball behind him, similar to the way that your rotator cuff basically keeps the ball and socket part into the shoulder and stabilizes your arm. Your glutes, basically, there's parts of your glutes that stabilize that stabilize your femur into your hip. So those are all like kind of telltales that I can do just observing someone's movement, like even on the court or in the gym before we even put them through like a basic assessment.
Got it. So if you're squatting and you're lunging and your knee starts tracking inwards, you're in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people right now are gymless and working out at home to try and stay in shape. What are a couple of things that you'd suggest they can do to maintain and improve their strength and fitness?
Well, first and foremost, and trying to order equipment right now is going to be tough. So understanding that, we did something on this last week where we talked about all the variables that go into designing a training program, right? And all the ways that we get people to change. Now, the philosophies that and the theories that we use in the strength and conditioning world, the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demands, the overload principle, right? So getting your body, giving your body a new challenge and kind of loading the nervous system and loading your body to where it has to adapt. But in order to do that, you might think, well, the only variable I have is weight, right? And I don't have any weights. And it's like, no, you don't have, that's not the one variable. Exercises, the exercise selection is a variable. Reps and sets, time, speed and tempo, base of support. Am I doing a single leg squat? Am I doing a bilateral squat? Or am I doing an offset squat, right? Those are three different things. Am I squatting to the bottom and pausing for 3 seconds before I squeeze my backside and stand up? That's significantly different than a squat where a 2-0-2 sort of tempo. Am I doing a jump squat, right? Am I doing complex that has 4 leg exercises put together? So I'm doing a lot of volume into my legs with body weight that might equate to me doing a set of heavy squats when it comes to volume, right? When you think of volume, sets times reps times load, right? So there's lots of different ways to change up your exercise regimen to tinker with the variables to still get the same amount of load, if that makes sense. Understanding that sets, reps, and weight equals volume. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. The way you organize the exercises, you can do lower body, upper body, core, right? And people say, well, I can't do a row with a lower body. It's like if you put yourself in a plank and imagine that you were doing a renegade row, but then like pulling, really squeezing your shoulder blade together and kind of really squeezing that bicep in after a while, you'd be like, wow, I felt that in my back. Yeah. Really didn't think I would. Or you do like a kind of a Superman position and kind of pretend that you're doing a lat pull, but still squeezing your shoulder blade down. And you're like, oh, that actually, I feel that in my shoulder blade. And it's like, okay, well, that's one exercise. How can I do that differently? And it's like, okay, well, now just do one arm at a time or reciprocal, right? Those are two additions or two changes to the complexity of the exercise that is a variable that you can change, right? So it's one of those, I know I'm kind of like, keep it simple, but change all these variables. But just understand that there are ways to do it. Remember and think about what all the variables are: sets, rep, load, exercise, complexity. And if you have weights, am I using a kettlebell versus a dumbbell? Because a 12-kilo dumbbell and a 12-kilo kettlebell feel like different loads when used certain ways, right? So those are things that I would kind of like off the top say, keep that in mind, because you can. Are you going to increase your deadlift at home if you're trying to deadlift 300 pounds? Possibly not, but understanding that strength more from a neuromuscular control standpoint, especially for you guys, is one of the things that I'd be more concerned about.
You touched on it briefly, but what would you think the benefits of unilateral training versus bilateral training for a squash player? I feel like we do so much stuff unilaterally, but a lot of us train bilaterally.
Correct. And you know, and Mike Boyle says it all the time. It's like one of the few unilateral sport, one of the few bilateral sports out there. It's like crew, right? They're the
Right.
only ones that really kind of push off of both legs at the same time. And maybe if you, I can't think of any. There might be some out there, but for the most part, we're mostly unilateral, right? Football, baseball, soccer, basketball, squash, all unilateral. So you want to do things that replicate life and sport, but you also want to be mindful of something called the bilateral deficit. If you have a discrepancy in strength in one leg versus the other, doing bilateral training won't necessarily help you out with that. So you want to be able to call each limb out on its own to get it to perform up to its potential, to make sure that there's ultimately balance, if that makes sense. Um, um, the other thing being, you know, you guys operate in a very three-dimensional sport. So making sure there's lateral lunges, curtsy lunges, you know, clock lunges, um, offset stance squats, and cable rows, squats and dumbbell presses, lunge and rows. So integrating lower body and upper body into one movement. You know, a squat and a lunge and press or a lunge and row. I mean, that to me ties together. Am I lunging and taking a shot at the same time, right? Um, because at that point, yeah, my core needs to be working properly, and those types of exercises integrate your core as well.
Mhm. Reading and research that speaks volumes about the HIIT training phenomenon, where the client needs to feel absolutely exhausted to feel like they've put in a good amount of work. What are your thoughts on that versus like training for quality versus quantity sort of a mindset?
Yeah. So I mean, look, the HIIT training might have a place when it comes to conditioning, right? But my point to people is, if you do HIIT training and it looks like crap and you don't move well, uh, you could have potentially put yourself in, and you could have potentially done more harm than danger, more harm than good. So can you get on an assault bike or a rower and do some sort of high intensity training that, you know, it's kind of hard. The form is kind of fail safe almost. That's more preferred than doing, you know, barbell snatches for time until your heart rate, you know, is at 80%, because eventually your form is going to break down mechanically and it's not going to look right. Right. So I think it all has its place when it comes to conditioning. I think, you know, knowing like from a heart rate variability standpoint, is my nervous system ready for this type of particular workout? And that's something that I'm working on becoming a little bit more knowledgeable on. Fran is our resident heart rate variability uh, expert, right? And I'm kind of learning that myself, but understanding like, you know, can I go and not like, you know, crush myself to the point where I'm not going to be able to fully function or operate when it comes game time. That's all important as well. But I think for the most part, um, for a lot of what we do, becoming subconsciously competent and moving well, and muscles activating and firing like they should, is the first goal.
Mhm.
And then being able to, and what I mean by that is like, so take the whole knee valgus, knee collapsing when you lunge sort of thing. Everything that we're doing is trying to take you from a point of being subconsciously incompetent. I didn't know that my knee collapsing was a result of my glute not firing and that my hips were tight, right? So then being consciously incompetent. I see that that's happening, right? To a point of being consciously competent. All right, so I got to mobilize my hip and make sure I'm firing properly and keeping my knee aligned properly. To a point of being consciously competent. I think I said that right. Consciously incompetent to consciously competent, meaning I can lunge and squat and everything fires right, right? So I'm worried about getting there first. And even if I have someone that's like on the court already playing a lot and I see like a certain condition, I'm going to say, hey, you know, bear with me for a second. I know you want to go out and crush life on the court, but it will be value added to us if we back up and get you consciously competent, subconsciously competent, moving right and not having knee valgus when you lunge. All right. So I focus on that first, understanding that, you know, you look at your heart rate and what goes into like a rally in squash. And also, I think Olivia showed me once this statistic that showed that basically squash, the rest time between points between squash and tennis. So you have basically no time to recover. So you need to be conditioned, right? So yeah, the high intensity training, high intensity interval training has a place when it comes to VO2 max and conditioning. But you want to make sure that the strength is there so you're prepared to do that and not injure yourself.
For sure. Well, lastly, I feel like we should chat a bit about COVID-19, but the future of it. How do you think this virus will impact public facilities like gyms in months to come? Have you thought about any new facility management policies at BodySpace? And do you think this will have people hesitating to sweat next to each other in a gym or in a class? What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts here. Obviously, I mean, we're a semi-private personal training studio, or one coach trains 3 clients at a time. And in an old world, we might have one coach working with. We might have up to 3 or 4 coaches working with 3 people in a class with 16 people going on. In the new world, I don't see that happening for a fairly long time. We're lucky enough to have a backup plan for all of this. So we've started like with virtual training. We do virtual classes. We actually started doing virtual training before they closed all the gyms in New York City. So we had like a week and change head start. But I imagine a world where, people are going to be concerned, understanding that it's not transferable through sweat, but you can pick it up if people cough and things like that. And kind of like, even if they don't cough, if they brought it in on, their bag or their shoes or something. So we've done everything, and even though the gyms aren't open yet, we're already planning for what life is going to look like and setting up various protocols and procedures, bought UV light sanitizing stations and wands and, UV light sanitizing stations for your shoes. I did get custom masks made for all of our clients. So I'll send you a picture of it, but they were made by a company called Primo, which does like cycling and triathlon kits. So it actually is made with a material that's a little bit more conducive to exercise. So I don't know if you ever tried to like run in a mask. It's in like a medical mask. It's not fun. But we're gonna, any of our clients that come to the gym, they'll get one of those. And then we'll probably be kind of set up the room in kind of like a more of a pod sort of structure where everyone will have their own space. So there's a lot of like operational things that we'll do, but I think it'll just be a matter of time and people being more comfortable and confident that in their safety and security, that you as a business are doing the right thing. Because at the end of the day, when they come into business and when they leave the business, they still got to go outside where there's a greater risk as well. But I'll be honest. It's funny because like last week was the breaking point for a lot of people, because the number of emails that I got that were like, "Hey, when are you opening back up?" And I'm like, well, first, when the governor says that we can actually move. Second, when, between our clients and between my staff, because I have to keep in mind that my staff and my own health and safety are important. When everyone feels comfortable and ready to do that. And luckily we have this like our virtual platform, which I imagine that a good majority of people are going to stay on that platform for a period of time. So we're going to ease ourselves back into it, but with a lot of operational changes and just open lines of communication about what's going on and asking people what they need.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to shed some light on?
Oh man. No, just remember that the magic happens. The magic doesn't happen during the training session. The magic happens in the adaptations that occur after the training session when you're resting and recovering. And I don't know if I'm speaking out of line by saying, hey, a lot of that motor patterning and a lot of that conditioning that you get on the court, you still need to rest and recover so that you can rebuild yourself back up stronger. So understand that sleep is a part of recovery. Nutrition is a part of recovery. Mindset meditation is a part of recovery. The magic happens when you recover. So please make sure you do that. Please make sure you prep. Please make sure you recover.
Perfect. Well, thanks again. Stay safe, and I cannot wait to come back into the gym and work out with all you guys.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for having me, and train hard, train smart, and see you guys. Hopefully I see you in the city soon.